This is the web transmission service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. Since the fall of Kabul and well before, veterans of the Canadian Armed Forces have been trying to assist their former Afghan interpreters and their families to escape from a vengeful Taliban regime. On Wednesday, November 17th, 3 retired Canadian generals, each of whom had commanded a rotation in Afghanistan, gathered at RCMI to discuss the problems their efforts are facing.
So my name is Dr. Dan Eustace. I'm the Director of the Defense and Security Studies Program here at the Royal Canadian Military Institute. And it's a great pleasure to be here with you. Tonight's a special night for at least 2 reasons. First, the one being that this is the first what we call a hybrid event for the Defense and Security Studies Program. Hybrid meaning we have speakers here with us in the audit room, we have a live audience in the audit room, and we also have a number of people that are joining us virtually via Zoom. So this is a great model, and we've got more technology going on in here right now than NASA does. And but I think we're going to make this work. Tonight is a very special night for us in terms of the fact as well that we have 3 very esteemed speakers that are probably well known to most of us who are members of the RCMI. We have Major General Denis Thompson, retired, Major General Dean Milner, and Major General David Fraser. These are all folks with outstanding military careers, and what they have in common is that they held high command positions in Afghanistan over various periods of time, and witnessed the tragedy that unfolded a couple of months ago when the United States actually carried out their stated intention to leave the country, which resulted in, as you saw on television, attempts by Afghan citizens, ordinary citizens, to evacuate the country. But subsequently, a number of folks, in fact many hundreds, if not thousands of Afghans who supported the Canadian Armed Forces and the US forces and others were left behind to their fate under the new Taliban, or the restored, depending on your time perspective, Taliban regime. So these 3 gentlemen have been incredibly active over the past several weeks and months, trying to figure out how to extricate those folks, many of them interpreters and people who held other positions that supported the Canadian Armed Forces, how to get out of that terrible situation. And so the title of tonight's event is called "A Remarkable Mobilization: Veterans in Support of the Afghan Evacuation." Now, I'm not going to go through the biographies of these gentlemen. They would take up many pages. There's a brief synopsis on the flyer that has been posted online that you can follow. I would like to highlight a couple of things, however, because really I've been very fortunate to have come in contact in different ways with these general officers, myself personally. So Denis Thompson was the commander of Task Force 308, I believe, and that happened at the same time that I was in Afghanistan, and Denis commanded the task force, and I didn't. Later on, ironically, we both ended up sitting in the same classroom at the Canadian Forces College, where we co-instructed a national security program course. Denis as the senior mentor, and myself as the academic for that course. So it was quite interesting to run into Denis in that context, and we had a great time together. But also from my own regimental perspective, Denis is the colonel of the Royal Canadian Regiment, so it's a great honor to have him here with us tonight.
Break into applause at any moment.
Yes.
I meant when the regiment thing.
Now, Major General David Fraser is very well known. He is a very accomplished military officer with an incredible career. He's very well known now for his role in Op Medusa, which was one of the largest combat operations that was conducted in Afghanistan. He is now as well an accomplished author, and he also commanded, or was the commandant of the Canadian Forces College in Toronto between 2007 and 2009, and that was a couple of years when I wasn't there. And I think he did that on purpose, so he tried to avoid that. It's probably a good thing. Major General Dean Milner was the last commander, I believe, of the Canadian mission in Afghanistan, where we were beginning to transition out of the combat role that we were in and into the support role. I did not directly work for General Milner. I supported one of his exercises when he was the commander of the 1st Canadian Division, exercise Trident Junction, and I had the pleasure of going down and supporting his headquarters when I was at the college. He is also a colonel of his regiment, the RCDs, and an excellent thing that is. But more importantly than that, is that I discovered recently that Mrs. Milner is actually on a committee of mine out there in Sydenham, where I'm involved with a community services organization, and Mrs. Milner, Catherine Milner, joined a couple of months back, and for some reason I just could not make the connection. I met her and I said, Milner, I know that name. Why do I know that name? I couldn't figure it out.
You're digging yourself in deeper.
Keeping an eye on you, Dad.
Yeah, that was the thing. And so I went online to try to find a good photograph of the general for the flyer. And what I found instead was a wonderful photograph of the general and his wife. He's a mess kit and he's at a wonderful dinner. And there they are, General Catherine Milner. The light bulb went on. And boy, am I slow on the uptake sometimes. It's incredible. But in any case, so it's absolutely a pleasure for me to be here tonight in this role as the moderator for this event. Sir, I would like to now turn the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, Dan, and thanks for the introduction. And on behalf of the Three Amigos, we're all very happy to be here this evening because the story we have to tell you is incredibly important and one that I know you'll get behind because, well, I'm actually certain that several people in this room are already behind it in a financial manner, but certainly we know that there's broad moral support for this effort across Canada as a country. So let me just answer the first question that usually pops into people's mind, like, why did we do it, Dan? Like, why are we doing this? And the answer is simple. We all went over, the three of us, to Afghanistan to fight a horrific enemy, but also to help the Afghans themselves build a society that was fair and just. Now, we can all argue about whether it was a nation-building exercise. Certainly Mr. Biden doesn't think it was. Or we can argue whether it was a counterinsurgency or counterterrorism exercise. All of that is moot. The point is, we signed up to this project. It's a policy decision made by our politicians. We leaned into it, and in order to make it happen, we needed the support of a whole number of Afghans, from interpreters through to drivers, through to locally engaged civilians in various places. And because the project failed, is no reason for us to turn our back on them. So that's the why. We understand it, and many veterans definitely understand it. So now I'm going to tell you, with the help of my assistant Dave here, my lovely assistant Dave, what actually happened and how did this come about? Well, first of all, back in 2017, a lady named Wendy Long started an organization called the Afghan Canadian Interpreters. Wendy lives in Hamilton, Ontario. She, I believe she works for the passport office. She's a government employee, and she cared about these Afghans who were trying to get out of Afghanistan before any of this crisis became what it is today. And it evolved, and it evolved, and it evolved to the point where it bubbled up to a number of veterans, and they approached the three of us, I think they approached Dean and I first because, you know, Dave's pretty scary. They approached the three of us and said, they approached the three of us and said, hey, would you help us? Like, we cannot seem to get the attention of the government, even though you can see one province falling after another and they're marching towards Kabul. Next slide, please, Dave. Well, you're good at that. So on the 8th of July, next, transition, we, the three of us, wrote a letter, an open letter to the ministers that were involved, in particular Minister Mendencino, to basically tell him that, you know, this crisis is on your doorstep. You need to fix the immigration process because it's not fit for purpose. The purpose being bringing these people home from this terrible endeavor. And I've highlighted a bit. Oh, Dave, he's too tricky. He's a good guy, but, you know, he's from the wrong regiment. Anyway, the highlighted bit essentially tells them that they need to appoint a senior official who's properly empowered and resourced to make this happen. In other words, something that both and I will recognize my wife right now since she's here in the room, Isabel, and I both worked on interdepartmental task forces. We know how government is supposed to work, and we basically propose, you know, adopt this structure that you're used to and get on with it. Next. That open letter, next, prompted the declaration that you would have heard on the 23rd of July, before the election, from the three ministers responsible, Minister Sajjan, Minister Mendencino, and Minister Garneau, Foreign Affairs, Defense, and Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship Canada, to announce a program called Special Immigration Measures to bring these people to Canada and resettle them next. Sadly, on the 15th of August, two things happened next. One, Kabul fell, much to many people's chagrin and surprise. And second, the Trudeau government announced an election. The timing could not have been worse for us because, as you know, once the government enters into the election mode, then the bureaucracy enters into what's called the caretaker mode. In other words, the extant policies are what you execute, the policies that were announced on the 23rd of July, and you don't color outside those lines. You have to wait for the politicians to activate these things, and they're loath to do that in the middle of an election campaign. Next. On the 27th of August, so you'd be familiar with the fact that there was already a military airlift in place, and that military airlift continued even though the Taliban controlled Kabul city. On the 27th of August, that air bridge for Canada effectively ended. They managed to get out 3,700 people on Canadian flights. Most of those were Canadian citizens, but some of them were the people we were concerned about. And it was an absolute dog's breakfast. There's no other way to describe it. Next. By the 20th of September, next, we all voted, and we got the same government. However, we didn't get the same ministers next. Instead, what we got were, go ahead, a whole brand new suite of ministers in all those critical posts. So now we have a bunch of ministers who aren't necessarily read into the problem. And they need to be in order to change the policy to give the people that need the tools they need to act. Next. And of course, then we come to today, next, and that's why you see us in front of you. Pretty exciting stuff. Okay, next. So what did we do during this time? We stood up this thing called the Afghanistan Strategic Evacuation Team, and it's not a not-for-government, it's a nothing. It doesn't exist, it used to be called Task Force Nebulous. I'm serious, that's what we call it at the beginning. Three of us in kind of a Roman triumvirate, which is a complete disaster from a command and control standpoint. But because we get along reasonably well, it seems to work. But what it does is it brings together those not-for-profit and charitable foundations you see on this slide. And if I go from the upper right corner and downwards, Veteran Transition Network is a well-known not-for-profit and charitable foundation that has in its mandate to help veterans and could therefore squeeze into their charitable foundation mandate the ability to assist veterans, in other words, since we were doing this as veterans, and those that had served the Canadian forces, such as our Afghan interpreter friends. Then you've got Raven Ray, which is a company headed up by a former JTF-2 soldier named David Lavery, who ran a business in Kabul for 10 years and had boots on the ground, literally, and still does to this day, although they're Afghan boots, not Canadian ones. Journalists for Human Rights is another organization that as the name implies, helps journalists. Aman Laura is a brand new not-for-profit, and one that we'll speak more about later, that basically runs operations on the ground, owns the database, keeps in touch with all the Afghans, tells them when to move to certain places in the city, moves them around the various safe houses, and does the operations. And then there's the Afghan Canadian Interpreters I already mentioned, and finally Building Markets, which is an NGO which for years worked with the Canadian government across Afghanistan doing a variety of development projects. Next, please. Now, how do you tie all that together? Well, this is the diagram we use. And if you're confused, it takes an awful lot of time to get people on paper and on mark. And the reason it looks like this is because you're dealing with a bunch of volunteer organizations. They're almost exclusively non-salaried people working inside this bubble here, and we do our best to keep them all rowing in the same direction. It's a challenge, I can tell you, and we'll talk about some of those later. So now I'm going to turn, go ahead. Now I'm going to turn it over to the famous Dave Fraser. Dave.
Dan, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here tonight and being online. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to be with you here tonight. The only retired guy who hasn't got a colonel title to my name, but that's okay. Seriously, this is a story about tremendous pride and tremendous sadness and sorrow. The pride that I have is working with a group of men and women who have all volunteered their time, have all committed to this mission, and are not getting paid for it because they're just doing it because it's what Canadians are, and it's doing the right thing. The sorrow is watching essentially our government being laggards in doing the right thing, and to this day, we are still struggling to bring out people that we have a moral obligation for, because without these people, we could not have done anything in Afghanistan. Different culture, different language, different everything. And a complexity that still to this day boggles my mind. And if you look at all the missions that Canada has done around the world, or potentially will be doing, we cannot do it without local civilians. And if we don't take care of these people, who will ever believe us ever again, when in fact we are a nation of immigrants? We bring 300,000 people in every year, and we're struggling to bring in 40,000 now, and we've only brought in 3,700 during the airlift, and since the airlift we've only brought out about 375. It's abysmal, it's paltry, it's disgusting, and as one of the G8 nations, we should all be ashamed. I can say the good news is Canadians get it. There's not a Canadian that I have not talked to that does not understand what it is that we're trying to do here and does not agree with it. They all agree with it. So much so that we have raised over $2.7 million from private citizens and corporations to fund our operations. This operation has happened because of Canadians and the generosity of corporations who want to see us do the right thing. And slowly, and I say very slowly, glacial speed behind, the Canadian government trods along with policies and procedures that are archaic. And if you're an Afghan, what Canada sends are emails that you have to work off of your cell phone and do paperwork that you and I would just roll our eyes in the back of our head and spend days just printing them off, filling them out, scanning them, putting them back into bureaucrats that are sitting in Ottawa. So we started off with looking forward to bring out 117 people that we knew that we had a list from ACI and that we wanted to bring them out because they were interpreters or locally employed civilians and their families. Today, we have about 1,700 applicants, or about 13,000 people stuck in Afghanistan, principally in Kabul. And we can't get them out. The Canadian government has said, once you get out of the country, we'll take care of you. Well, most of our operations were conducted down in Kandahar, where most of these people are, and we couldn't get them from Kandahar to Kabul. We hired and we got planes and tried to fly them up to Kabul, where they said that's where we're going to start. Then they changed the rules. No longer in Kabul, you have to now get to the airport. And how you get from wherever you are to the airport is your responsibility. Then it changed to you had to get out of the country and we'll take care of you. The goalposts kept changing. So here we are, and we've now got some public funding, $1.7 million. So that's not chump change, but it is something. But this is far below what is needed to get these people out, because we only got 375 out since the airlift. And most of the 30,700 people who came out of the airlift were Canadian citizens or permanent residents of this country, but not the affected groups. The affected groups are interpreters, locally employed civilians, affected groups like the LGBTQ, like women, like journalists, etc., and their families. And so we need an awful lot more money to make this operation happen. Otherwise, we will have abandoned about 13,000 people. And those people that we have abandoned is only the tip of the iceberg. There are other organizations that have done and are still struggling the same way we are. So what? How do we get this story out is like what, and I compliment RCMI, what you are doing tonight to get this story out and to tell great things that our Canadians and volunteers, Canadian-based NGOs are doing. We have, and again, are blessed for, I think, probably the first time in my career, a media who gets it. There is not a media outlet out there that does not and has not completely signed up to this story and wants to do the right thing. So CTV, W5 did an amazing expose on this. And there's Dave Lowry in the bottom right, a great Canadian hero. We don't use that term very often, but that's a hero. There is a guy that has his heart and soul. He lost everything in this operation. 10 years. He lost his business, he lost his house, he almost lost his family because of some of the shenanigans that Canadian bureaucrats were offering up to him. So everybody has gotten up here, but I can't stop without saying a few funny words. Well, we've also created a media darling amongst the Three Amigos. And I'd like to say my friend here on the right has now become the CTV go-to guy. Because if you want somebody to go and talk on CTV, it's Denis Thompson. Dean Milner and I are relegated to places like CP24 and other amazing radio face talk shows, because our faces aren't good enough. Because look at this head; it's great as bowling balls, but we don't have the looks that Denis Thompson has. Now you're getting laughter. Now you're getting.
That's applause, Dave. That's applause.
But seriously, let me go back here. We're not doing this to glorify ourselves. None of us are doing this for us. We are only doing this to get the word out that there are a bunch of people who need our help. And we have been blessed with the people like Kevin Newman, amazing journalist, Lisa LaFlante, Evan Solomon. I could go on and on and on. There is not a journalist that's not committed to this. And they are keeping the pressure on the government to do the right thing. So this has been a concerted effort of us to tell the story, keep the pressure on, but at the same time not turn off everybody, because it's a pretty sad story too. And I just want to say I'm being pretty proud of the journalism in this country over this operation, because they have done an amazing job and continue to do so to tell what is in fact something we all need to know. And now I'm going to turn over to my good buddy here, Dean Milner, to talk about the operations themselves.
Can you see that, Ken?
Can you pass it down?
Yeah, pass it down. Don't break it, it's expensive.
I'll let Dave push the buttons.
Okay. I'm feeling better already.
Okay, it's great to be here. I real honor, thanks to the President, Dan, to let the Three Amigos, the Three Uncles, come here to present our little part of Afghanistan. It is really good. And I realize that I think I'm the only one here that's not a member of this great place. So I think I need to get myself going. So
We have a deal on right now.
okay. John was telling me about that deal. But, and I just want to back up a little bit. So we spent 13, 14 years in Afghanistan. That's a long time. The three of us, and I'll tell you, they've been great partners to work with, just outstanding. Can you imagine a Patricia, a Royal, and a Dragoon?
Pretty scary.
It actually has been excellent. It's a great, I know, it's been a great team. But you know, look at 13, 14 years Canada's been in Afghanistan, and that's a long time. We worked alongside some tremendous Afghans, and you're going to hear about some of those here shortly. But you know, we had that moral obligation to bring them out of that crazy country. Nobody thought that they would end up, Afghanistan would end up where it is now. And I would argue that we came out Canada too early. I was the last one, last commander in Afghanistan that passed the flag to an ambassador, a great lady, Deborah Lyons, and we left Afghanistan with Singapore in 2014 when we were responsible for setting up the institutions of Afghanistan, and we really did leave too early. But all that to say is that this little venture that we've taken on here is really to get those Afghans out of that country, and again, it needs to happen. It really does need to happen. We've got a great team that's been working on it, and it has been a real honor to work with these great people. They've talked about a few. You've got the generals here. We've got corporals. We've got majors. We've got civilians. We've got some really talented and just absolutely passionate people on this team that are really driving this forward. And we're not giving in. One of the most talented guys on our team is a corporal, former corporal, Tim Later. And I tell you, dealing with this guy, watching him work the media, watching him work the donation side of the house. He's the one that's driving, and I'll talk about an operations here shortly. We're trying to get aircraft into Afghanistan to continue to pull these Afghans out. We've moved 375, as Dave mentioned, over the last 2-3 months. We need to continue to do that. And he's been one of the biggest driving forces doing that. Past operations, what we've been doing really since the air bridge ended is that we've been sheltering Afghans. We've been providing that life support. We've been doing everything that we can to keep them safe and secure so that we can eventually pull them out of Afghanistan. So the money that we've received from donations, again, very limited support from this government of ours. I think Dave mentioned that they've given us $1.7 million. They've restricted what we can use that $1.7 million for. We can't use it to shelter Afghans. We can't even use it, I don't think, to maneuver them, to fly them out. So that 1.7, it's very difficult to talk about what the government is enabling us to use that money for, but they have supported us. So really, recently, that's been our focus. And as you know, we've run out of money. So that operations that we've been supporting, trying to work with our IRCC to move the paperwork along, which is another story that I don't think we've talked about probably enough right now, is our bureaucracy in trying to get our Afghans the right paperwork to be able to get them out of the country. It's just inexplicable to me. I still don't understand it. I don't think the three of us really understand it. But again, we've been working that, and that's been part of our team to try and better understand how to get them out of the country. So that's really past operations up until now, what we've been focused on, and that's sheltering Afghans, getting them ready to hopefully get them out of the country. Next slide. Here's a slide, and you know, this is where the passionate side comes. We've had a few small victories. The three of us worked with a gentleman called Jim Labibi. We all worked with him during our time frame. He's got a lovely family, wife, 7 kids, and so there has been those small victories. We managed to get Dave Lavery, who you saw on that screen, a former SOF soldier, actually was extremely important in helping get that family out. I had that family over for dinner just this weekend. So 12 of them with my interpreter, soldiered with those two for 2 years in Afghanistan. So you do see some of the small victories. Mind you, they're still in a hotel. They're on their 4th hotel. We're trying to figure out where we're going to put them, but that's IRCC. They haven't figured out how to get them permanent residency. But again, it's a small victory. They're a lovely family, talented kids, MBAs, doctorates, you know, so they're going to be great here in Canada. But his phone was captured by the Taliban, probably this close to being killed by the Taliban before we got them out. So that's just an example of some of the small successes that we talk about. 17 or 18% of our 10,000+ have we managed to get out of Afghanistan so far. Next slide. So current operations. Really, it's been difficult. We really haven't been able to do too much. We've been working with MGen, our NGOs. We've been working with all those great people up there. And all we've managed to do is move a few across the border into Pakistan and fly them out. So that 375 that Dave talked about, that's it. That's really all that we've been able to do. Transportation, our NGOs that are on the ground, great guys like Dave Lavery with his contacts with the Afghans to get them through the Torgan Gate, to get through the massive bureaucracy and visas. And I still don't understand, because we've a family that managed to get there, got turned away from our own High Commission. Now they're back in Peshawar waiting for another piece of paper to get them out. But that's really what we're dealing with, because we really just haven't had that support that this government should be providing. We actually have a plan. We have an outstanding plan. And this government just does not know how to take this plan and execute it. So again, we've managed to pull 375 out. Now, what we're doing, which is very important now, and this is where a young guy, Tim Laidler, who's really driving the 3 generals, we're in full support. But with our donations, we're managing to get a flight that we've lined up, and we've managed 320 that have the right paperwork. We think they have the right paperwork, biometrics and all that, is to get them on a flight. Get them into a place like Qatar, final screening, and then to Canada. So that's 320 out of the 10,000 plus. That's how complicated this is to be able to move that small a number. Now that's okay, because we're moving in the right direction. I call it onesies and twosies right now. The fact that we can bring some of these Afghans that have supported us in Afghanistan like they did, it makes you feel good. But you can sure tell that if we had support from this government and the financial support and some means of getting, supporting our plan, we would get them up. That diagram on the bottom with all the dots, that's all Taliban checkpoints that we have to get our people through to get them into Pakistan and out. So you can see the challenges that we face. Next slide. So the challenges that we face down the road, I'll be honest, generals are always optimistic. We're always optimistic. And I can't say that I'm optimistic with this government right now. We can't do it without that. We have a plan. There's no leaders that are taking this and running with it. We don't have, is it GAC? Is it IRCC? You know, there's a interdepartmental task force. I mean, they're muddling along. Poor Dennis has to go to those meetings, but really nobody has taken this on. And it's really tough. We have a great plan. We can give them that plan. A little bit of money, we can get planes into Afghanistan. The Taliban, to be honest, they're having so many problems themselves, feeding themselves, taking care of the country. They'd probably be happy. You know, give them a little bit of money and let them get the people out. Risk aversion, you know, I don't need to speak to that. There's just too much of that nowadays. You know, they are absolutely risk adverse. And it has been really, really difficult. Fundraising, bless guys like Dave and Dennis. Dennis even got the Legion involved. You know, we've got so many that these guys, and thanks John. John gave me a $500 check today, thanks. But you know, we you know, it's private fundraising that we've had across this country because everybody supports this. But the government that has all the money, they're big talkers. The Prime Minister said 40,000. You know, we're failing, 3,700. And so we will continue to fundraise, and we absolutely thank everybody that has been supporting us on this very important mission, because we don't want to go into other countries looking like we are right now. And the last one is a challenge. You know, how much can we keep this great group of young Canadians, veterans, working on this project where we're still trying to get the Afghans out? How long is this going to last without that support that we absolutely need from the government? So again, it's a noble cause. It's a really noble cause because these Afghans supported us, fought with us, died with us, and we need to continue driving that cause. And these two great guys next to me have just done some great work doing that. So we thank you for your support. And typical, Army guys, we don't give in easy. Short of me driving a tank up somewhere and pointing at the, But anyway, it's thank you. We're going to keep working at it, and hopefully this government will turn around and give us some support. And if not, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. So thank you.
Let me just finish on a high note here. We have 3,000 people cleared, ready to go. And we are not going to give up until we get those 3,000 people out of the country. Now, that's 3,000 out of 12, 13,000, but we're going to get the 3,000 out. And they've got the documentation, they're ready to go, and we're gonna bust our, to get them out there, because we're just old guys and we don't quit. And we'll keep on working on the rest of the people there too. But we need your support. We need your support to go and write to your MP and tell them to do the right thing and keep the message going. And then, if you've got $20 or you can give it whatever you can, go to the BTN website and give the money to them. If you can't, just give the message and that story to somebody else so we keep this story going. It's the right thing to do.
So write down that web address and be generous. Huh? It's on there. See the web address.
I can't see it.
Oh.
It's behind you.
Right, it's on the bottom page. Anyway, we'll end it up there, and I think Dan wants to officiate.
That was fantastic, thank you. So this is now your opportunity to ask these gentlemen questions, whether you are online or whether you are here live in the audit room. Let me start, if I may, ask a question to get things rolling. I mean, this is probably irrelevant to what you are doing, but certainly it is a proximate factor in the sense that the speed with which the Taliban overtook the country seems to have caught people by surprise.
With their pants down.
Were you surprised? Were any of you surprised that that happened so quickly?
Well, I would say yes. I was.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I was not surprised the country fell. I was surprised at the speed at which it fell, which is a function of the worst transition plan I have ever seen in my life. Not the political decision to pull out, because that was two administrations wanted to do it, the American people wanted to do it, but how they went about doing it was abysmal. And the lack of understanding and listening probably to a bunch of military leaders and foreign affairs, State Department people who said the will of the Afghans, if you pull out 2,500 American soldiers, would crumble. That was completely underestimated in a political decision that's left us in a humanitarian crisis.
Dan, and if I may, because I'm very passionate about this, is that this is a bit of a lesson for Canada. When we left in 2014, it was a bit of an embarrassment for me, I'll be honest. We left with Singapore. We were 50% through building the institutions in Afghanistan. We were the second largest training mission in Afghanistan. Second largest. When we left, nobody could fill our positions. We asked the Aussies, we asked the Brits. The Brits were still warfighting. The Americans were heavily committed. Nobody filled our schools. We had intentions with military colleges, so I did not hand any of my capabilities over to a force. Just a little bit of a mark. So if you think about it, the rest of NATO and the Australians stayed until fairly recently. And I think that one of the challenges, I mean, there's corruption, there was a lot of problems in the country, and I think that it's another example for, you just can't lead countries just like that. I briefed the Prime Minister at the time, and I really didn't get a good answer as to why we were leaving. And I think we all know why we pulled out, and I think there was intentions, and there's a great book on it, but we were looking at elections, of which unfortunately he didn't manage to make those elections. But yeah, the speed, I don't think anybody would have expected the speed. It's a tough country. I mean, it's a warlike country, tribal. Sometimes it takes a long time, and look at the problems that it's going to cause this world now because of ISIS-K and where it is. And I think there's some good lessons learned, and I just hope that politically we learn those, because it's a real shame that we're in the state we're in. But it did happen a lot faster than I think any of us would have imagined.
Real briefly, Dan, if I may.
Sure.
Exact, just to pile on what Dean's saying. If you don't build an institution, you can train as many infantrymen as you want, but if you don't build the institution and start sitting on top of them, it'll collapse. And that's exactly what we saw. And it wasn't what we expected, because we thought that institution had been at least reasonably built to withstand some of the pressure from the Taliban, but we were sadly wrong. And that points exactly what General Milner is talking about.
Questions? Eric Morse, please.
I was talking with Dean before dinner about this AI application that allows immigration officers to deny 100 applications with the push of a button. And I just want to ask you, you don't have to answer, but do you suspect institutional or systematic or cultural bad faith on the Department of Immigration?
Before these guys jump in and say that they regret, let me just let me say that the process is complicated, and here it is. Oh, maybe not.
You want me to push the button?
Yeah, it worked before. It's not working now. There we go. There's the process, right?
That's
You
the
can't
Roman-
read it, which is probably a good thing, but
That's
it's
the Roman
complicated.
Republican government.
Right, it's excruciatingly complicated. Why? Because at some point you have to confirm two things. One, that the person meets the security requirements to enter into Canada, and two, that the person is who he says he is. It's John and not Jack. And getting those two things done from remotely in a country as under-infrastructured as Afghanistan is extremely difficult. That has been a fine ointment. But I will say, and these two gentlemen both know it, that in the last little while, this aircraft, which is 320 or so folks that we're planning to bring out very soon, it have been done in complete cooperation successfully and at a reasonably adept speed with Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada. The trick is to find a way to work with them effectively. That's my spin on it, but I know there's other ones.
And I cannot speak to having witnessed or heard of any institutional racism or anything against these applicants. However, the bureaucratic process that they have to go through is the impediment itself that is stopping them from getting to this country. And the risk aversion of this government to assume no risk, and also based on what the experience of the Americans who actually pulled people out who weren't the people they wanted to pull out, and the blowback onto our country if we pull somebody out and goes either into a third-party location or comes into this country that is not the person that we want, i.e. could be a terrorist or somebody else. Nobody is accepting any risk. And therefore, the default is they don't get through until, you know, as Dennis said, 100% assured.
I would just like to add one thing. So in 15, we moved 25,000 Syrians out of Jordan and Lebanon. 25. Okay, so my crew was 25, and that's even great. I won't argue.
That's our format.
Yeah, that's probably my math. But so, I mean, I was heavily involved in that. So I sent 3 teams over. And the speed and the capabilities that we organized and drove into those countries to bring those people out, how we vetted them, how we took risks, how we paid bribes, the team that we put on the ground. We could have put that exact same team on the ground in Afghanistan. This government did not want to do it. So you can cut through the bureaucracy. There's no doubt in my mind. We proved it. We brought that many, 45,000, out in an extremely short period of time. It took a couple operators. One of the biggest things that I've seen is this government does not know how to execute. They do not know how to operationalize. They do not know how to move forward. It takes a couple go-getters. It takes hiring the right people to do that. And I think we can do anything, but we can do it, but they just haven't proven that they can do it now. And it's embarrassing. I mean, you know, Dennis was right. We've got 320, but bloody hell, it's taken a long time to do that. And yeah, I don't add anything.
I've got a couple questions online.
Okay, we'll take one question online and then we'll hear from Mike Moore. Question from online.
I'm gonna let this attendee to talk.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
I've asked them to unmute. There you go. Hello?
That's an easy one.
I'm sorry, we're not hearing anything.
It says they're unmuted. But
Can you read your question?
Let me see. We actually have quite a few in the question box as well. But this is a different gentleman that has their hand up.
Do you know his name? What is?
His name is Kamal. Kamal, we're not able to hear you. If you can turn your sound up.
Okay, while you're sorting that out, I'll
Okay.
ask Mike
Sure.
Worsley to ask his question.
Yeah, obviously, if I might say, a lack of government support, a bit of an understatement. But are there any Liberal MPs that are supportive of you, that are you're engaged with, that offer some kind of avenue to the higher levels of government?
There's an absolutely stellar Liberal MP in Thunder Bay, I think his name is Saint Aubin,
Yes.
who has been a thorn in the side of his own caucus at his own expense, and his own political advisors. One of them has essentially committed Harry Carey in the Liberal Party, and he's out. Oh no, there is support in the caucus, and I wouldn't be surprised to learn that there was all-party support. It's just that, as I said before, we've been in this caretaker mode for some period of time. We've had a complete change of ministers, and I will tell you that because I checked the PM's itinerary, there was a cabinet meeting on the 16th yesterday, and we're expecting something to fall out of that. I know today he's in DC, but there's a possibility. And we always, because hope springs eternal amongst this crew here, we think that something might come of that.
Let's hope.
Yeah.
Margarita, go back to you now. Do you have a question from the online, please?
I'm trying to see if Kamal has fixed his sound. Hello? I'm not sure. So I've got about 5 questions in the Q&A. Are you able to pull them up on your end?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, we'll take them selectively. I think the first one we'd like to take is, I'll read it because although Dave has his reading glasses on, I'll let him answer it. Thanks, gentlemen. Does it matter if I support VTN, which is, by the way, the address that you see at the bottom of the screen, or Amon Laura, which, as we mentioned before, is the operational arm of this thing? I am a huge fan of VTN, and it's a well-known charity, by the way. These are editorial injects by myself. But I know very little about Amon Laura, a question that Dave Fraser is very well positioned to answer. Dave.
So VTN has been the mother structure that has fundraised and funded other groups, including Amon Laura. So if you go to the VTN,
This address.
yeah, vtncanada.org, you can put your money into there. 100% of your donation, 100% goes to programs. None of it goes to administration. And that money then gets funneled down to organizations like Amon Laura. So they do the actual work on the ground. So your money can go directly to there. And we've been able to organize that, and it's been working exceptionally well, and we can get money right into the country.
Thank you.
All right, let's see, we've got another one here. It's a little bit shorter. Why are our opposition leaders not taking the government to task? Oh. Dean? I'm asking the questions, man.
I can't answer that, but I mean, I sure wish that they do it in a lot stronger means.
Sorry, Dean, but I mean, we do know that obviously the opposition's involved. James Vassan and a friend of all of the three of us, Alex Ruff, who's the MP in Simcoe Gray, I think it is.
An MP?
Yeah, you know he's an MP.
Owen Sound.
Is it on sound? Yeah. Anyway, Alex is definitely on side because he's a former colonel in a very, very distinguished and storied regiment. I think it's called the Royal Canadian Regiment. But he's now a member of Parliament, and he's clearly on side with respect to this.
Questions from the audience? Mike Clary.
You've spoken a bit about the difficulties internally in Canada. But as far as getting people out of Afghanistan and the dangers there, is that the Taliban policies about letting these people go, or is it corruption within Afghanistan? Where are the difficulties?
I think we should all remind ourselves that the air bridge happened because of the regimes allowing it to happen. They allowed the United States to come in and set up an airport. You can argue about the transition, but the US-led air bridge is pretty spectacular in getting 130,000 people out of the country. They took over an airport and they ran an airport, and that was done with the tacit support of that in-country regime today. The fact that anybody gets out of the country is because the Taliban allow it to happen. So that is to our advantage, and one of the things that we as a group, we're not playing politics, but we will take the opportunity of a regime that's allowing us to move people out of the country while they still want it to happen. And we don't want to waste that time, and that's our problem, is that time is marching on, and the people's hope is disappearing. The money, as Dean said, is gone. And how much goodwill are we going to keep on getting from the Taliban before they turn their attentions to the unrest and the civil war that's about to occur in that country? So we've got to sort of work on that. And the other thing I would say is that, well, we've been working together with a bunch of volunteers here to do some great things. I can't speak for the other two, but my network, my US network, my British network exploded. And we were sharing our frustrations with our respective governments. We were passing files of people who worked for the US or worked in the US working for Canada. We were sharing files and trying to get people out. It was a pretty impressive behind the scenes network, and that was again the other thing I took away was whatever network you have in your life never disappears. And in time of crisis you find out who your friends are, because they pick up the phone and they call you. What can we do to help you? What can we do to help, can you help us? And and that reaffirmed my role and what we did in the 14 years we were there, that we still have a lot of friends in the UK, the US, and elsewhere. And just look at what those Ukrainians do. Commandeering a bus and getting people out. You gotta love them, okay? I mean, that was probably one of the most impressive things, and just, and that's pretty cool. And we just got to keep on working on getting more of those cool stories out.
I think we have time for one more question, and if there's one in the audience, that would be great. Otherwise, we can try to take one more online.
Oh, they're long, so.
Yeah, that's a long one.
It's a book. That's a book. You can read it. All right. Communication with emigres, remittances, and industrial opportunities allowed the U.S. to, quote, win the peace after the Vietnam War. The government of Canada had no plan for evacuation and have no plan for the post-withdrawal period. The flight of our embassy staff was a low point for our reputation. Do you think we can sell the idea that government of Canada support for evacuation as a strategy to win the post-war period? So in other words, get this done right, and it'll allow us to win the fact that this project as a whole failed, as I believe what the question says. And I would answer, it can't hurt. But since I got the question, I'll leave it to my other two esteemed colleagues to answer it in full. I pronounced every word.
I think the observation that from a diplomatic point of view, I was pretty disappointed the ambassador of Canada was not there on the ground. Okay, the fact that he wasn't there, he was out, okay, he got sick, whatever, should be replaced. All right, we had two other nations there that had their ambassadors stay, Great Britain, France. They were stamping passports at the airport. It's leadership by example. We didn't demonstrate leadership, and to this day we still get people who try to go up to the door and knock on the door and looking for some sort of assistance from a Canadian High Commissioner or embassy, and they don't get it. That's not what I expect from my country. I expect my country to at least, and the same thing, soldiers standing on the wall with their backs to Afghans standing in sewage. Okay, you don't, first of all, the threat is where the sewage is and the people are, as was demonstrated a few days after that, and a bunch of, unfortunately, Marines were killed. The threat came from there, and you don't put your back to the threat. Number two is, as Canadians, you show interest in those poor people, and you throw them an apple, you throw them a bottle of water, you say something to them, but you don't ignore them. This is not what I did when I served, or these two guys on either side of me served. Tim Ligler, who was a corporal, quite frankly, and a guard at the gate when I was over there. What was I thinking, putting this guy on a gate guard? This is not what Canada stands for. And this is something I think we all should be asking ourselves questions. Why have we been so failing in this mission? It is not good enough for Canadians to allow this to happen. So, you know, we need evacuation plans. We've done it in the past with Syria. I've done it in elsewhere, in Lebanon and whatnot. And yet today, it was a fiasco. It's a failure. The general should be fired for not doing enough. Foreign affairs, everyone else. This isn't good enough for Canada. Not good enough.
Totally agree. Don't have anything to add to that. An absolute failure.
Well,
This fellow's got a question. One last question, Danny's been itching that.
sorry, okay, fine, please, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm a new member here. You guys wonderful talk. Remind me a novel I read when I was in grade 12 English class, The Kite Runner. The novel called Kite Runner.
Oh, great book. Yeah,
Do you guys
excellent
think?
book.
Do you guys think the same story happening again as the Kite Runner time?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's repeating the same history. Repeating.
You mean we think it's going to go back to the 1990s?
Yeah. something
Yeah,
like
well, it
that.
already has in many ways, right? I mean, think about the fact that, well, essentially there are no women at work anymore. They sent them all packing, unless they hold down really critical posts. And our favorite topic, which is girls in schools, well, that's finished. And of course, you probably heard that in some of the outlying provinces, women have been forced to marry Taliban fighters. So it's definitely reverted to the 1990s. They've kept their hands off of our people for the moment, and the coalition's people for the moment, because I believe they still have the expectation that there's going to be some form of recognition of the government. When that's not forthcoming, the gloves are really going to come off, and those poor bastards are all going to die. That's why we got to get them out. And that's why we can't muck around with this, and we need to do it at scale and rapidly.
And I don't think people understand the challenges that ISIS-K brings. ISIS-K is just a horrific organization, and they're going to take advantage of the mess that this country's in right now. So, and you know, I'll just end with Dennis's point. You know, we built schools. We developed, and the international community developed. The Taliban have taken us back in history 30, 40 years. It's just an absolute mess for women, everything. It's such a shame, but I think the international community is a failure in this whole thing. And again, we need to get, unfortunately, people out, because I don't see it getting better anytime soon. Good point. Yeah.
Thank you for that question. All right, let me start to wrap this up. It has been a difficult conversation in many respects, but it's a realistic conversation. So General Thompson started off by making an important point that, you know, for whatever reason, you know, the mission has been assessed as failing, whether it was an attempt at nation building or whether it was counterinsurgency. Doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. That's not the point. That's not what they're trying to correct. It's the effect of what has happened. He called it all nebulous. I think I might challenge my students at the college next week. I'm going to say I want you to write a paper about nebulous. See if they can figure out what that was. The bottom line is it's definitely not nebulous. It's very, very clear. It's very specific. Talked about pride and sorrow. Those two things often go together, but at the same time that it's a noble cause. Boy, there's a word you don't hear every day. Noble.
Long gone.
A great word. Okay? Noble. It's important. You know, at the college, we talk about planning, operational planning, we talk about strategic planning, which is one way of saying let's do things right. And then we talk about design thinking, which is doing the right things. And in this case, we need to do both. We need to do things right, which clearly, evidently, we didn't do. But now we're left with the important thing, which is to do the right thing. And we need to do both of those. For the RCMI, I will put together a transcript, a highly edited transcript of this discussion.
You can quote Dave Fraser.
And it will appear in the next edition of SITREP, which gets published online and across the country and in many parts around the world. So certainly people will know about this, this venture to the greatest extent that we can make that happen. Let me then turn to thanking some people. Let me thank Sylvia Lau. She's not here now, but Sylvia is the master of events for the RCMI and did a tremendous job preparing for this, both in terms of the physical setup and the online. Margie, thank you very much. If you're still online, very much appreciated. You working this tonight from home, managing the Zoom portion. Eric Morse, as always, is here as our Director of Communications and Videotaping, and he will do the editing. Lots of staff are involved here, both in terms of the dinner and in terms of the technical support. And the setup is extremely important. Brian Roulat, for those of you who don't know, partially sponsored our dinner tonight, Maxis. And Brian is a constant supporter of the RCMI and a director, and we very much appreciate his support. Mike Orr ensured that we were here on time at 7 o'clock to keep things rolling. So these things don't come together easily. There's lots of moving parts, and so we can do things right once in a while. And hopefully we're also going to do the right thing as well. Let me just, if I may, turn to Major General Denis Thompson. I believe he has a presentation that he would like to make.
Right, I think most of us know that Mr. Mike Orr is going to leave the RCMI, an institution in which I am a member dean. He's going to leave as the president. He's not leaving the RCMI, and he's going to stay on the earth. But I thought I would make a small presentation. I have in my pocket the much valued coin of the Colonel of the Regiment of the RCR, and I think, Mike, given your 5.5 years service, you deserve it.
That's a great surprise. Thank you very much.
He's the guy that convinced me to join the RCMI.
This has been another in our series of webcasts produced by the Royal Canadian Military Institute in Toronto as a public educational service. You can find news of upcoming events and links to our webcast archives at www.rcmi.org. On behalf of the RCMI, this is Eric Morse saying goodbye for now, and thank you for joining us.